I was a technical person at one point in my life, and I heard emotional intelligence, woo woo. Emotions don't belong in the workplace. But if I reframe it and rephrase it and use the term emotionally intelligent, I put a very practical spin on it because emotional intelligence is about observation and behaviors.
Welcome to Your Intended Message. My guest today is Susan Schwartz. Susan is a leadership and management coach who uses a unique, emotionally intelligent approach to equip her clients with skills to lead highly motivated teams and achieve business results. Here's 3 facts about Susan. She is the author of the book, Creating a Greater Whole, a project manager's guide to becoming a leader. It's the main textbook for a project management communication course that is part of a Georgetown University master's degree program where Susan is a guest lecturer. 2, the second fact, Susan developed an Expert to Excellence leadership program that uses practical, measurable, emotional intelligence methods that help people understand intangible leadership skills and create tangible action plans, from intangible to tangible. And the third fact about Susan is she moved from Washington, D.C. area to San Francisco about 4 years ago. And she made the move by taking a road trip across the country, and her adventure has not yet stopped. Even though she's already in San Francisco, the adventure continues. Susan Schwartz, welcome to the adventure of Your Intended Message.
Well, thank you, George. I'm really pleased to be a guest on Your Intended Message. I love your podcast. It just rings true to my heart, and I've really enjoyed listening to some of your other guests.
Delighted to hear that. And I trust that our conversation will also be wonderfully enlightening. Susan, you help technical people, project managers, engineers, technical experts communicate more effectively by taking into account emotional intelligence. And when you approach a technical expert about emotional intelligence, do you get pushback from them?
Yes and no. Because when you hear the phrase emotional intelligence, and I was a technical person at one point in my life, and I heard emotional intelligence, it still is a technical word, woo-woo. And you just, emotions don't belong in the workplace. But if I reframe it and rephrase it and use the term emotionally intelligent, then it puts a spin on it. And when I talk about my unique approach, I put a very practical spin on it because emotional intelligence is about observation and behaviors. And if you want to talk about how do you become, emotionally intelligent on one foot, it's paying attention. And what happens when a technical person is promoted for their expertise and all those years they spent honing that knowledge, they've had a mindset that's all about them. What is their expertise? People come to them. They are the expert. When you get promoted to be a manager or a leadership role, all of a sudden, it's not about you, it's about them. And that's awfully scary because your performance evaluation is not based on what you achieved. Your performance evaluation is based on what the people who work with you or for you, and perhaps even partners outside of your company. So you have to really start paying attention to them so that you can do your job well. And that's what, I don't know if you agree or not, George, but I find that when I make it about how they relate to others, excuse me, as opposed to how they can improve themselves. It's a mindset shift.
And that must be a major shift, almost an earthquake type shift, because when you think about people who go into the technical fields, they're trained, they're encouraged, they're rewarded for being good themselves, getting all their answers right on the test, performing the experiment, writing their report, and they're promoted. Oh, me, look at what I know, look at how good I am, I'm smart, I got the right answers. People come, and then they get hired. Oh, people come to me for answers. I give them the right answers. Oh, I'm so successful. And then one day they get promoted, and they now need to stop giving answers, but maybe ask better questions.
Exactly. And think about, George, you're you're sharing, I'm sharing my message. Thank you for saying it so well. And you know what, when have you been involved in a situation where you've worked for somebody who was an expert that got promoted as their, how did you feel about that manager?
And and the short answer is yes. And I think even at one time I was that person. I remember how proud I was of my expertise, what I knew, what I could do. And then I was promoted to be a supervisor and then a manager. And then I realized that, well, okay, I can do some of these jobs faster than they can because I know, but I can't keep just jumping in there and doing it for them.
Right. And you've got to delegate. That's perhaps the one of two most important skills, because you're so busy doing their job, you can't do your job till after 5 o'clock. And when I'm working with my workshops, you can't get promoted if you're busy doing your people's work, because you are so very important, and nobody else can do what you can do. They can't possibly promote you because you're too valuable in your current role.
And I heard a pearl of wisdom there that I want to repeat for people. If you are a leader, a team leader, a manager, if you're the only one that can do the job, then you aren't doing your job. If you're the only one who can do what it is that your department, your team delivers, then you're really not doing it properly, because you're not the manager. You think you're still a star.
Exactly. And your success is dependent on their success. And so that comes back to, you have to start being open and realize that your success is by giving people professional development, helping them grow. And that's the second piece of the puzzle. And this is why I love the name of your podcast, is these new knowledge experts transforming to leadership roles sometimes have difficulty assuring that the message they intended is received as they intended. And because how often, I've done it a lot, I'm sure you've done it also, going, that's not what I meant. And it still happens to me today, and it's not what I meant, because you just made an assumption that they think exactly like you think. So if you're explaining it in your terms, of course they should know it. And then you end up getting frustrated doing it yourself, and then people leave because they're just humiliated. They think they're stupid, and then because your message isn't being received as you intended, and you get frustrated because they're not smart enough or fast enough. So then you take it back and you do it yourself. And, I had a client call me in because there was a really great knowledge expert who'd been promoted. And he just assumed that only the people who worked exactly like he did were worth keeping. And he just humiliated people. And so when we talk about being emotionally intelligent, and that's what observing is, where you step back, you observe the situation, and then you do have experience and knowledge. And so based on what's happening and the people involved, then you get to choose how you behave to create that constructive solution.
Do you have a critical presentation coming up? One that can influence the direction of your career or business? How can you be ready to give it your best? Contact me. I'm George Torok, the speech coach for executives. Together, we can create and polish a superior presentation that will get you your desired results.
And hopefully along the way, you'll also strive for collaboration, to get people working together. And I like to say leadership is not a solo sport. So, thinking about those fast moving, we're watching the World Cup in soccer. It's fast moving, and you have to recognize where you are and where everybody else is, and to align and make sure that you're all going towards the same goal. And everybody has a different role, a different position, and every now and then they shift, or maybe somebody gets injured. All of a sudden, somebody has an appendicitis attack and they can't be at work. How do you adapt and shift and keep everybody moving? So it's, how do you make sure that your roles are aligned? And just like you were mentioning, George, about you're the smartest and nobody can do it better. So when you're thinking all about you decide how you want to be perceived and what your role is. And your role might be to be the sharpest crayon in the box. Your manager may have a different role in mind. And just like you and I with our managers who'd had poor role models and didn't behave like we'd like them to, we had a different vision of what they should be. So if all of those align, it's great. If they don't align, you're going at cross purposes. And then you're not hearing the message that your manager's giving to you. Your coworkers, your colleagues in other departments don't want to work with you because you have to be the smartest person in the room. And then the people who are on your team are looking to be on other people's teams because they're not getting any growth. And that just leads into how you execute. And then when bad things happen, because they just do, you need to, how do we react to stress? More important than thinking about, oh my gosh, what is Susan going to do? Or George, how am I going to, this is just, it's the worst thing that ever happened. Well, if you've got a whole team of people out there, they're looking to you to see how upset they should be. And, and I like to tell my leadership workshop participants that the dirty little secret that leaders don't tell new leaders is we're making it up as we go along. We really don't know what we're doing when crisis hits. We're just trying to look at the situation, evaluate what our options are based on our experience and knowledge, and try to, choose a path forward and involve the right people and make things happen. And so the key about stress management, it's not about your stress. It's about keeping your team focused so they can move in the right direction and get through that situation. And that's where problem solving gets in and how different people solve problems differently. So it's just like the other manager I mentioned, some of us like to, or me, I love sticky notes and I'm brainstorming. Can you tell? Magic markers, big charts on the walls, jumping around. No idea is a bad idea. And I think you may be more like my husband, who's an engineer, and he likes to take into consideration what all the parameters are. He likes to go away. He'll come up with 2 or 3 alternatives, and then he comes back to the table with, say, 6 other engineers, and they each put in their suggestions, and it's a very logical, well thought out process. Now, it doesn't mean that we both won't come to a similar conclusion. How we get there is different. So if you have a whole bunch of people and they all are smart and have different perspectives and different work styles. You also need to know how to balance and how to pair different people or ask key questions or ask a question 2 or 3 different ways, in the same 2 minute of discussion or, leading off that discussion. And so that's why I call emotionally intelligent leaders really active leaders. And emotional intelligence, some people think it's all about reflection, that woo-woo definition. And I like to flip it on its head and say, no, it's really an action word. It's how you choose how you're going to act. It's really not about you, it's about them. And that's why I find emotional intelligence, or I like to say practical emotional intelligence, is such a valuable tool in helping the people who are so used to tangible logic, who just don't, how do you measure empathy and confidence and communications or your community involvement, your team recognition. How do you measure all that? And the model that I use applies numbers. It's a psychometric technique that's been research covers probably by now 30 years of research. And it actually puts numbers and graphs, and I've taken those graphs and created normal curves where people, you mentioned before about technical people, George, were 94 to 100's an A. You're nodding your head at me. Yeah. And were you like one of those overachievers that would go to the wall to get a 97 raised to a 99?
You bet.
Well, this time it's all statistically, it's all relative terms. So 100 is average. It's the mean of that normal curve. So if you score 100, that means that 50% of the people are not as well developed, or I like to call it engaged in that skill, and 50% of the people are more engaged. So it's not bad, it's using and balancing. So for example, I worked with a restaurant owner and a chef, and the restaurant owner had fabulous communication skills. She was new to the restaurant business and really stressed, so her problem-solving skills were her least engaged skills. The chef, on the other hand, his strongest skill set was problem-solving. Communications was his least engaged skill set. When bad things happen, the plumbing breaks, the refrigerator stops working, he just wants to swoop in and solve the problem and get right back to work. And he didn't understand why the restaurant owner needed to talk about it. It was her responsibility. It's her business. She wanted to know what was going on. She didn't want to just know what the answer was. She wanted to know how you got there. And so he started physically hiding from her. And then we came together and looked at where their strengths were, and when things were good, they were so in sync. So what happens? How could they behave differently? And we came up with 3 different scenarios and 3 different actions, depending on what level the priority was, that the chef and the restaurant owner would communicate.
And that would be situations. three different reactions that each of them could take, or that they would do similarly?
That they would do together.
Okay.
So if it was a certain level and it's in the middle of service, she would go to the chef's assistant right hand. And if she came to him because she wanted to go to the source, he would say, ask Marvin. And she wouldn't get upset. She'd say, okay, he's busy, Marvin, I'll go to Marvin. And, so they established Marvin as the go-between. And then he and Marvin used a management platform, which she had been introduced to, and she'd forgotten. So they had a second training session. So many of her questions that she had could be answered if she looked at this tracking program. So if there was a problem, they kept notes when it got fixed and when it didn't get fixed. And she just wasn't aware of when it got fixed, so she didn't think it had. And the chef didn't think she had to tell her. So, once they got into that, those were two of the solutions. But once they identified, their working relationship improved because they weren't each frustrated with the other. They recognized how they were different and how it mapped to the work that they both did so well. And so how do you come in the middle? How do you balance out those different traits, different strengths and weaknesses? And then we talk about becoming an emotionally intelligent leader, or even creating an emotionally intelligent team, where everybody is on that same page.
And Susan, I'm wondering, when you worked with that restaurant owner and that chef, and when they reached a point where they suddenly understood how the other person thought way different from what they did, was there that aha moment where they both, where the sun opened up and the sky was clear and now I see the light? Was it that kind of epiphany for both of them?
More so for the restaurant owner than for the chef. The chef got it, but again, his communication skills were not his strongest. So I think he had the aha inside. He just wasn't as ebullient. With the restaurant owner, it was just like you said. The skies opened up. She didn't there was nothing wrong with her. She thought she was a terrible person. She thought, she was taking all of this, just it is what it is, and blaming herself. And so when she realized that she didn't need to blame herself, that let's just look at this as a situation to manage. It's not a problem, it's a situation, let's manage it. And when she was able to approach it from that viewpoint, exactly what you said, George, the sky just opened.
And I also noticed that when in that point there were, you used the phrase "ask Marvin," those kind of phrases almost become like a secret code between them. When that really means, I'm busy, don't bother me right now. Ask Marvin.
You got it. You got it right. With that, yes, with that same level of frustration.
So it seems like we need to develop our own code, our own language. Okay, when I say this is what I really mean. Or when I say this is how I'm feeling right now. Don't bother me.
Right. And George, that's why I felt this great synergy with, this podcast, your intended message. Do you find yourself getting into frustrations when your message isn't received as you intended it? Do you find that still happening?
Yes, it still happens, and even though I've been studying communication for decades, and it still frustrates me when it just doesn't come out the right way, or I let myself get triggered by something someone else does or say. So it's an ongoing struggle. There's no question.
So just a little bit of time we've gotten to know each other, you come across as an incredibly emotionally intelligent person. So when you go, and you realize you've got this gap, you're not connecting, what is your first reaction?
And you're right. And it's been a struggle because my thinking is math. I was a math and science guy.
Oh, cool.
And so everything, everything had to be logical. But then I realized that that's not the way the world works. And so when I run into those problems, those with myself, the first thing is to say, okay, well, what triggered that, or what could they be thinking? And I'd like to say that I can do it in the moment, but it doesn't always happen. It's usually later when I reflect back and say, well, that conversation didn't go well. What could I have said differently other than just keeping my mouth shut?
And I do exactly the same thing. I so wish that I would always be clear in the moment. But, the key is we both observe a situation we answered the best we could because maybe we had to give an answer in that snap second. And then that goes back to how we handle those stressful situations. And I still forget, but no action is an action.
Mm.
So if, you have a bully and somebody's it wants to put you on the spot, you've got your district level person and they want to make you look stupid. And so they bring up, something totally inconsequential and you're not prepared to answer it. And so you stand there going, blah, 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 blah. When somebody taught me a trick where you look at them and go, that's a really good question. I don't think I have enough information or we don't have enough time. Let's make an appointment next week, Tuesday or Wednesday, and we can really get into that. And, it just got flipped around. You haven't made that person look stupid.
It's going to disarm the person and bring the tension right down because the person's going to be totally confused.
Right. And I still, every now and then I do it, and every now and then I don't. And that's the key, exactly what you were saying. Not that we wake up at 3 a.m., when the nighttime demons don't let you go back to sleep and you start thinking about all those woulda, coulda, shouldas, but to use your community to go back and find those people who will be direct and kind and maybe walk you through woulda, coulda, shoulda. So they might say, oof, I think you did the best you could. Or they might say, George, Susan, let's look at this from their perspective. And then the next time that happens, then it's your experience. You get to take your experience. Hopefully you've got sort of a quick checklist because these are split-second decisions. But once you've practiced and gotten it in your mind, then the next time you will make that comment that gets your message across as you intended.
And Susan, for people who'd like to learn more about your services, where can they find you?
Well, the quickest in this short amount of time is to go to my website. You can get there through the URL, expert2excellence.me. And that will take you to my website. And there's a place you can order my book, some podcasts, some blogs, a listing of some of the different programs I offer. And there's a way to get in touch with me there. I'm also active on LinkedIn. If anybody would like to connect, you can never have too many friends. And I would love to connect with your audience.
And you can find those links in the description below. Susan, before we wrap up, if you could sit down with a technical expert who's recently been moved into a leadership role, and they're struggling with the concept of not being the smartest person with all the answers all the time, but now trying to manage this team of people who don't quite all think the way the leader does, what 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice would you give to them to be more emotionally intelligent?
Oof, that is an excellent question. And recently I was given the phrase, it depends. See, I got you to laugh, but it's true. But if I were to go in, one of the things that I like to do is ask them to tell me about their job, their role, and how they define success. And then I walk them backwards and I say, well, how does each member of your team contribute to your success? And as we walk through each team member and we see the big picture, and then we start talking about how they might question, different question asking techniques. Because when I always like when we talk about, is your message being received as it's intended? Other is, how often do people not tell you everything? They're not lying. They're just only giving you the information. They're giving you the message they intend for you to receive. And so how do you ask those probing questions to get to the bottom of it, where they truly may not understand? And that's where your smartest book, crayon in the room experience, you can ask them questions so they can figure it out, as opposed to just telling them. And so we'll walk through how do you get those question asking techniques down. We'll talk about feedback, not just, I don't do performance reviews. I'm not going to the HR area, but somebody writes some macro code, or they do need to diagram an engineering, whatever, circuit design. You can tell I'm not an engineer, but, and they may not do it just right. So how do you ask those questions to learn how they were thinking, so you can identify where their professional development needs to be? And so we'll spend a lot of time, but always coming back to what is the big mission, what drives success, and then how do the people who report to them complete that. And then the second area is those managers in other departments. I like to call, it's sort of that emotional intelligence GPS. How do you frame it for the boss above you, the people beside you, and those people who work for you? And probably that most important GPS direction are your colleagues in other departments. And none of us ever have enough people, enough money, enough time. And so you're going to try to call these on your peers to sort of beg, borrow, and steal resources to get something accomplished in the short term. So if you have a good relationship, they're going to want to help you. If you have an acrimonious relationship, they're not. And so those are the two areas, really. How do they communicate through questioning and being respectful and building the people whose works for them really expertise, so they'll have a succession plan when it's time for them to be promoted? And how do you build those bridges with your colleagues in other departments, because they may be your best friends, or when you make that unfortunate comment in front of the VP, they might be your direct and kind people who might help you practice how you should frame it in the future.
Valuable advice. My guest today is Susan Schwartz, reminding you that the dirty little leadership secret is we're just making it up as we go. If you like what you heard, remember to like, comment, and share this podcast. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you convey your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.